picked up my material for my floor in the boat this morning. It's 5/8 treated, and it's really pretty stuff. But like most treated plywood, it's soaking wet. So I got it ahead of time. I'm gonna bring it over here to the foundry and put some fans on it and try to dry it out. You can't just lay it in the sun or it'll warp up and turn into a banana, but it'll dry out. It's good stuff.
This is rated for ground contact, which unlike Home Depot plywood is rated for above ground contact only. It's just a more expensive type of plywood.
My treated plywood sat in front of the fan for 2 days, and huge amount of difference in lost moisture. Still wet. I got them spread around the shop now so they can dry nice and even and slow, and maybe they won't turn into bananas.
I'm making a pattern to cut out the plywood for the floor. I'm using a spiraling technique. This is old as the hills. And so basically I took a random sheet of 1/4 inch plywood and put it in the bottom of the boat and tacked it so it wouldn't move. And then I have this spiraling stick. It has a point on one end, and I'm just touching the pointy end of the stick where I think the edge of the finished plywood should be. And when I get it where I want it, then I'm marking the other end of the spiraling stick. It has notches cut in it, so you can relocate the spiraling stick right back where you had it the first time. So the curve is gradual. I don't need that many marks. But as I get toward the front of the boat, I'm putting more marks. And the spiraling stick, it doesn't have to be perpendicular. It can be any slanted way you want to put it. The lines can overlap because of the 2 notches that are in the spiraling stick. It's going to leave a mark on the plywood that you can't mess up. It's pretty idiot proof. As long as the plywood template is big enough so you're not trying to cram too much stuff in a little bitty piece, and as long as it doesn't move. It can't move, so you have to nail it down.
And with the same sheet of plywood I had in the boat and the same spiraling stick, I just I nail this down to my good sheet, and I line it up with the marks I made and grab these little spots. The more complicated the shape, the more little points you should take. This is a fairly smooth curve. So that gives me a bunch of points out here. Just have to connect these little marks to a curve, cut them out, and it ought to be pretty close to what we're looking for.
So because this sheet of plywood, the one in the very front of the boat, it intercepts or crosses the topmost strake, you get a weird shape. So you can see the pencil mark takes a dog leg, but it's supposed to do that because the side of the boat's not straight. So you'll see when I get it back in there, and it ended up fitting pretty well.
This is the treated plywood I bought to build the floor out of, and it's not Home Depot treated plywood. It's a step up. For one thing, there are no voids in any of the core like marine plywood, and it's obviously got waterproof glue like marine plywood. Unlike marine plywood, it won't rot because it's treated. Now, it's not as many laminations, so it's not as stable as marine plywood, and it doesn't have a pretty finish for painting like marine plywood. But for under this floor, I think it's probably a better choice, and it's half the price. Problem is, when you buy it, it's really wet, so you have to put it somewhere and dry it out. You can't put it in the sun. I've had it over at the foundry, spread out, and now it's pretty dry. And I've cut all my floor and laid it in place. There's no screws, it's just laying there. So I'm gluing these blocks on the bottom of the joint of the plywood floor. The bulkhead falls about here, and you don't want, in a boat, you don't want the plywood to end on the bulkhead like you do when you're framing a house, because if you did, then you would just have a little bitty 1-inch strip to get both edges down tight and get them flat. This way I've got a big surface to pull these edges together and straight and flat, and it'll fall between the bulkheads. So Things are a little different when you're building a boat than when you're building a house. So I'm fitting my floor again, putting it in, screwing it down temporarily. It's got to come out because of there's no foam under it yet. And also the screws don't hold. I didn't think they would. Screws just don't hold in fiberglass very well. The fiberglass is so hard and brittle that the screw just kind of cracks it on the way in and there's nothing left. But I was figuring on that. When I take the floor up to foam, I will drill out each one of these screw holes in the stringer, maybe 5/8 of an inch, and fill it with epoxy. And then when I go put the floor back in, I have something solid to put the screw in, and it'll hold better than this. But this is pretty common, is having screws not hold in fiberglass. But feels good, no big lumps. Happy with it. Happy man. Tired man. So this morning I'm going to take the floor, or these two pieces of floor, back out. I'm going to drill and fill all the screw holes in the stringer. I'm going to insulate my fish box, and I'm going to try to find the leak in my water tank. And I'm going to bevel all the holes in the plywood floor so the screw heads will fit down flush. And hopefully by that time my foam will arrive. I ordered 4 gallons. And that should get me way past the halfway point, so I can be able to put these 2 sheets back in for permanent.
So I drilled out all the screw holes 5/8 of an inch by about 2.5, 3 inches, and used a vacuum cleaner to pull out all the little bits of foam, because that's what the inside of the stringer is. And I'm just filling them up with epoxy, trying not to make too big a mess, but it is kind of messy. But for the most part, it doesn't matter. It's down below the floor. But we can't do the plywood until we finish the foam. I'm trying to fill the cavities next to the hull first, because it's just so much easier to get the handsaw in there to cut them down flat. And then after I cut them, whatever I cut off, I'm throwing in a head, and I'm using all that foam. I'm not going to throw it away. I'm also using all my pink foam scraps. So this is kind of what a typical cavity looks like when I'm through. Some areas will be a little bit low and some areas will be way high. It's pretty hard to get it just right. What you can't do is drag it. You just got to let it do its thing. And then I just cut off the bumps, throw them ahead. I mixed the foam 4 ounces of each A and B at a time and poured it in the bottom, and that did 2 things for me. One, it locked down most of my scraps and keeps them from floating up, because it would get hard and hold everything down. But secondly, it was like 83 degrees, and it's a little cool for this foam. The first batch you pour in the bottom of these hull sections, it doesn't expand very well, or not as good as it should, but it does get hot. And then when you pour the next batch on top of it, it expands much better. So I learned a few things. This stuff just doesn't work well in cool weather. I've got some more to do when it's getting cooler, so I'm thinking about putting some heaters in these little compartments to warm them up well before I start pouring.
The fish box lid is set in place. It's set in a bed of caulk, and then I put another caulk around the top, so it should be pretty water moisture proof, I guess. And now I am going to apply epoxy and put the deck down. So if you see me crying, that means something's going wrong. I'm going to use this epoxy in the tube stuff.
I'm going to do a separate video on the insulated fish box, or the holding box, because it was kind of complicated in itself. So there'll be a video coming out soon on it. I laid the 2x4 down to try to get the deck plywood into position without just dragging it. Pretty hard to hold from one end, and if I just slide it, I'm going to knock all my epoxy off. So I got it into place pretty close without smearing the epoxy all around, and put the screws in, and this time the screws held very well. Pulled it down tight.
The second sheet of plywood is ready to get glued and screwed down, but I will not be using the epoxy in the caulk. It was just too stiff and too slow. My hand cramped up. I'm really disappointed. I was hoping to get some more epoxy under this plywood. So I'm going to go a different route on the second sheet. First 2 sheets glued and screwed down. Good grief, how long did that take? 2 months? 3 months? Amazing. I cut the hole for the water tank. I kind of wish I wouldn't have. It'd have been better if I'd have just glassed this whole surface flat and cut it after the fact, but no big deal. I'm not cutting the hole for these two hatches until after I glass it. The third piece is ready to go, but there's no foam under it. The fourth piece will probably hold off till the transom's done, and I might start that pretty soon, or I might start benches up here. It sure is easier climbing out the boat without the transom full height. I may start trying to figure out what I'm going to do up here as far as closing in the sides and some sort of benches up front. It'd be a nice diversion from what I've been doing on my hands and knees for so long. So the front section of the deck, I've got a layer of chop mat and 2 layers of woven roving, and it took about a half a gallon of resin, and it's roughly 8 square feet. So 1 gallon is going to do 16 square feet, roughly. At that rate, I'm going to need 6.5 more gallons to finish the deck. I have maybe 2 gallons, so that's another 5-gallon bucket. And if I get another 5-gallon bucket for the transom and whatever we build back there, and another 5-gallon bucket for these seats up front, I think I need 3 more 5-gallon buckets. So this will be the third time I bought 3 5-gallon buckets. I probably would have come out better buying a drum, 55 gallons, money-wise, but drums are pretty hard to handle. And then if you end up with a couple of gallons in the bottom of the drum, it's kind of like, what do you do with it? It's kind of wasted. So, the next day or two, I will head to the big city of New Orleans. I will pick up 15 more gallons of resin, and I have foam ordered.
So my procedure for glassing down the deck, first I sand. The gray is epoxy paint, and I know there'll be people saying I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't put polyester resin over epoxy, but the plywood is so rough on the surface, and the paint is sand's real easy, so I'm not going to have a problem with any delamination. So first I sand, then I wipe down with acetone, get it clean, get all my greasy handprints off of it, and then I put down a layer of chop mat. I make sure all 3 layers, well, the chop mat and the woven roving go up the side because that's tabbing the floor to the hull. And the layer of chop mat uses almost as much resin as both layers of the 19-ounce woven roving combined. It's just amazing how much resin this chop mat soaks up. And then I put down my first sheet of woven and wet it out and get it as wet as I can. And the second sheet, wet it out, get as wet as I can. And I'm setting up now where I have a good 4 or 5 inch lap between all 3 layers, so I can just cut all my material the same width and lay it down, and I'll have steady laps from the front of the boat to the back of the boat. Many ways to foam a hull, many ways to deck a hull, many ways to put down glass on top of a deck. This is how I'm doing it. May not be the best way, certainly not the worst way, but it's working for me. So thanks for watching.